I grew up in Southern California, half and half between Venice and Malibu. And then I went to Stanford. I did my undergraduate and my master's degree there. So I was living in Northern California for about 7 years. And being up there, that was really when I started painting seriously, was my first couple of years of college. Being in Northern California, where the weather is actually quite different than Southern California, there's a lot of fog, and just the lighting in general is different. It permeated my work and definitely affected the light and atmosphere that comes through, especially in those early fog paintings. I think you can tell that I was a Northern California native rather than a Southern California native at the time. I'm also studying environmental science. I have my bachelor's in marine biology and a master's in oceanography and marine policy. And you cannot study the environment right now without studying climate change. And gas stations, and in particular gas stations at night, are aesthetically an image that appeals to me artistically because I do a lot of sort of that very stark, luminous nighttime scene. How do you do art and also do science? And those are two disciplines that seem completely disparate and separate and like they're completely different processes. In a lot of ways, both science and art are very similar at their core, which is that you come up with a question or a problem, and then it's a way of creative problem solving to figure out how to answer that question. So in science, you have your hypothesis, but in art, you have an idea or you have an image or a concept you find fascinating, and then trying to figure out how to encapsulate that in a piece of work, or in my case, a painting, and convey that is the creative problem solving. When I'm actually painting, I kind of am not thinking in a cognitive, analytical way. So I guess in that way it is a break from academia and from science in general. I think that's common for a lot of artists, is that you really just get into the flow of what you're doing. Most of my paintings are based on some sort of perspective or view that I've had, and I grew up near the ocean with the horizon. But I think it also has to do with giving the viewer a point of reference off which to base the reaction. If you give someone a horizon, it sort of settles you and gives you a point of reference of, like, okay, here is where I am in reference to what I'm looking at. And then you can begin to fill in your own narrative or extrapolate upon whatever it is you're looking at. work a lot with light sources in my work, and because I paint in such a minimalist way, and it is a very minimalist use of paint, they're very flat layers, there isn't a whole lot of texture, and it's a way of bringing sort of a vibrancy and a three-dimensionality to this two-dimensional plane of the painting. I saw a lightning storm once down in Baja California where it was the entire horizon was just filled with lightning, and it was very dramatic and it was very awe-inspiring. And I think that sense of having awe inspired in you is what I'm going for in those works, and that's why I find that imagery so captivating. It's this sense of being very small in the face of something you can't control. I grew up as a surfer. In my work, I've always been really interested in exploring imagery that causes a very primal, sort of evocative atmosphere. And as a surfer and someone who spends a lot of time in the ocean, there is nothing more captivating than looking up and seeing that set wave and just having that feeling of vulnerability and awe in the face of nature. I like to paint scenes and images that are very relatable to everyday life, but also have enough ambiguity and mystique that it can be relatable to lots of people in lots of different walks of life and different periods in their life. So airplanes and traveling and that ambiguity of coming or going and that mysterious sort of scene was something that has interested me for a long time, and so that was one of the earliest bodies of work that I still have continued to explore. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, and I was up at my parents' house. My parents live on the beach, and it was a very foggy 4th of July. There was a barge that was setting off fireworks, and we watched the fireworks in the fog. So I was very interested in this very dense atmosphere in my work. And I hadn't played too much with the idea of lights and fog and light and atmosphere and the interaction of that sort of very misty quality. So it was just this light bulb went off watching this firework display in the fog of a way to bring together color and light and atmosphere. Aesthetically, the lightning paintings are very similar, I think, to the firework paintings, but have a much more sort of ominous undercurrent to them. lot of the darker paintings, they look very black and white, or the wave paintings look very blue. But I actually do use a lot of color in my work, color subtlety and color juxtaposition to create these very subtle effects of atmosphere and space and light. Even though it may look like I'm not using a lot of color, I actually do use a lot of color. I very rarely use actual black. I mix most of my blacks, and I find that that's a really good way to create variation that's almost imperceptible.